I know making titles can be intimidating because sometimes you just don't know where to start. To help make this a bit easier, I'm going to go over how I made this trailer style title and share some of my thought process when making something like this. Keep in mind this is more of an overview and it really isn't meant for someone who is just starting to learn After Effects. I'm going to come over here to my project window and I'm going to come down and start a new composition. I'll call this title tutorial. Make it 1920 by 1080, and I'm going to keep it at 60 frames per second for the sake of this video, but you might want to use 24 or 30 depending on what you're working on. Try matching the frame rate of the footage that your title is going to be used with. Go ahead and hit OK. And now that we have our comp, let's go ahead and make some text. Use the text tool here. Type in fire text. And now we have to choose our font. You're going to want to choose something that best fits the genre of the thing that you're making the title for. I wanted something kind of rough looking that would fit well with the fire and the background that I had in mind. Maybe something that would be used in an old world adventure trailer or something like that. I used Adobe Typekit to find the font that I was happy with. If you haven't used Adobe Typekit and you have a Creative Cloud subscription, get on that now. With my text layer selected, I'm going to come over here to the Effects and Presets panel, and then I'm going to search for Bevel Alpha. And there it is, and I can double click on that, and it'll add that effect to my text layer. Here I can play with the edge thickness, and if I zoom in a little bit on the text, you can see how that's affecting our layer. It's kind of giving it more of a 3D look on the edges. I'm going to leave that at about 4 for now. Next I'm going to change the light angle to -140, since this is the direction where the majority of the fire will be coming from later on. I'll also change the light color to an orange, also to match the fire that we're going to have. Something like that looks good. Let's go ahead and make our background layer. I'm going to use a texture that I got from Video Copilot's Action Essentials 2, but you can use any texture that you want. If you don't have one, you can go out and take a picture of any texture you find interesting, whether it be the ground, a wall, or anything. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and kind of move this around until I find a spot that looks kind of interesting. Let's see, probably up here in this corner. Let's see. I think something like that looks good. Now with our texture layer selected, I'm going to search for the emboss effect. Now double click it and apply it. I'm going to change the direction here to -140 again to match what we have on our other effect. This way all the light's coming from the same direction. Now I'm going to set the contrast to 258, but you can use whatever looks good for your project. And next I'm going to come over and add a Gaussian blur. I'll change the blurriness to 16, and then I'm going to check repeat edge pixels so our edges don't start disappearing. Now let's create some heat distortion by coming back over here and adding the turbulent displace effect. I'm going to change the amount to 10, the size to 75, and for the evolution, I'm going to add an expression. I'm going to hold Alt and click on the stopwatch. And down here in the expression field that comes up, I'm going to type in time times 75. This means that every second that goes by, the evolution will increase by 75. You can do the same thing using keyframes, but I like this method because it doesn't depend on the layer's duration. And now I'm going to go back to the project window and add our fire. This I also got from Video Copilot's Action Essentials 2, but there's a bunch of free fire clips on the internet that you can use as well. With this layer selected, I'm going to hit S to bring up the scale, and I'm going to increase this to 200. Now let me scrub through this and kind of see how it looks. I'm going to want most of this fire. Let me turn this on over here so I can see where the edges of the layer are. I want most of the fire to kind of be over here in the bottom left. So let's see how this looks. Let's go ahead and move this. There we go. we go. I'm going to move this down a little bit more. And that looks good to me. The reason why I want most of the fire to be in the bottom left is because that's where we set our light direction to be coming from for our effects earlier on. Now I also wanted a bit more of a mystical look for the fire. So I came over here and I added a directional blur. And I changed the direction to 40 and the blur length to 59. And I just feel like it gives it a little bit more of a mystical look to it. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this layer by hitting Control D. And for the top layer, I'm going to change the blending mode to add. And this helps to brighten up the fire. Now let's go ahead and jump back to the text layer. And I'm going to come over here and add the texturize. Whoops, texturize. Where you at? There you are. Texturize effect. I'm going to come over here and make this reference our texture layer. If I zoom in to our text, you can see that it gives the text a little bit of a texture to it, similar to our background. And let me go ahead and increase the size of this text also. There we go, looking good. And now let me jump back to our texture layer and I'm going to change this direction to match what we have on our other effects. Just set it to -140 again. And now the light for this texture is coming from the bottom left. Let's come over and add some turbulent displace for some more heat distortion, this time on our text. I'm going to change the amount to 15, the size to 35. And again, I'm going to come over here to the evolution, Alt-click on the stopwatch, and then I'm going to type in the same expression that we had before, which is time times 75. And now if I scrub through this, let me minimize some of this and let me solo the text layer so you can see that the text is moving around kind of like it has some heat distortion to it. Now we need some sparks. I'm going to come over here to layer, new, solid. I will call this sparks. Okay. And I'm going to move this below our text layer. And actually I can see that the fire is over our text. I want the fire to be behind our text. So I'm going to move our text above our fire layers. There we go. So we have our text, we have our fires, and I'm actually going to move our sparks above our fire as well. And so right now we just have a black solid, but that will be our sparks. To add our sparks, I'm going to make sure that my sparks layer is selected. And I'm going to come back over to the effects and presets panel. And I'm going to type in CC Particle Systems 2. When I double click on that, it will add the effect. I'm going to come over here to the birth rate and decrease that to 0.1. And I'm going to come over here to the longevity and I'm going to increase that to 4. And for the producer, I'm going to increase the X radius. Here, let me solo this layer so I can better see it. And I'm going to increase the X radius, which is just the radius of where these particles are being produced. And I'm going to increase that so it covers the entire screen. And I kind of get a nice consistency with how many sparks I want. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to move the bottom position so they are being produced below our frame. Next, I'm going to jump over to the physics and I'm going to change the animation to twirly. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. I'll change the velocity to 1.5, the gravity to 0. And I'll come down here and I will change the birth and death colors to better match the fire that we have. So I'm going to make this a little bit of an orange. Something like that looks good. And I don't want the red to be so bright. Bit of a red orange there. Now let's go ahead and see what that looks like. That is looking pretty good. But you can see at the very beginning of the frame, we do not have any sparks. That's because we have to wait for the sparks to actually be produced before they enter in the frame and we can see them. To fix this, I'm just going to take our layer and I'm going to drag this in, and now we can see that we have sparks in our frame. Just going to adjust the length here and we are good to go. Now I'm going to unsolo the sparks layer and we can see what this looks like so far. All right, there it is so far. It is looking pretty good. I think I do want the fire to be a bit more active in the beginning though. So I'm going to select both the fire layers and move them in until I see that it is more active in the beginning. Let's see. There we go. That is looking very active. For this next effect, we'll make it look like the text is burning with the CC burn effect. The text layer selected, I'm going to come over here to the effects and presets panel again and type in CC burn. Double click on it. For burn right here, I'm going to alt click on the stopwatch, type in time times 10. And now over time, the text is gradually going to burn. And it starts to turn black and then gradually start to disappear. Now what I like to do is I like to go to the random seed here and kind of mess with this a little bit until I get a look that I want. Maybe something like this. Let me see what that looks like. I think that there is looking pretty good. And now I want to animate the text scale, but if I do that now, let me pull up the scale and zoom in here so you can better see. If I animate the scale now, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but when I animate this scale here, the text is scaling properly, but the texture that is on the text is not scaling with the text. It's just kind of staying there in the background. To fix this, I can pre-compose this layer. So I'll set this back to 100 like it was. Then I'm going to right click, pre-compose, call this fire text. We'll just call this text and make sure that we move all attributes into the new composition. And okay. And now when we scale this, we can see that the texture does move with the text when we scale it. So I'm going to go to the first frame of the composition and I'm going to change this to 0 scale. So the text is completely gone. And I'm going to zoom into the timeline and I'm going to put our first keyframe there. And I'm going to move forward 5 frames with page down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I will change the scale to 90%. I'm going to highlight these keyframes, press F9 to easy ease them. What that does is it just makes the animation look a lot smoother. And in my opinion, to make the animation look a little bit better even, I'm going to come over here and click this button to go into the graph editor. And we can see that this is a graph of how our scale is animating over time. We're looking at the speed at which it's animating. So I'm going to come over here to these handles. If I click that right there, and I'm going to click this handle and drag it to the left. I'm going to do the same thing to the left handle. I'm going to drag that over here. What that does is now it's going to, at the beginning of the animation, it's going to start off really, really fast, animating up towards the 90% extremely fast. And then for those last few frames, it's going to increase the rest of the way to 90% at a much slower pace. I just really like the look of that. So now let me render that out. And of course it's really quick, but we can see it goes from 0% to 56.3%. And I just pointed at the screen as if you can actually see that. It goes to 56.3%. And then from 56 to 74 to 84, and you can see it slows down to 90%. Now I'm going to zoom back out of the timeline. I'm going to highlight both these keyframes and copy them. And now let's decide how long we want this title to last. Let's make this a 5-second title. There we go, we're at 5 seconds. I'm going to hit N on my keyboard to mark that as the end of my work area. And I'm going to right click on my work area and I'm going to hit Trim Comp to work area. Now my composition is just 5 seconds long. Now I'm going to go to the very end of my composition, and I'm going to go backwards 5 frames with page up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to paste my keyframes. But this time I don't want my keyframes to be animating from 0 to 90. I want them to be animating from 90 to 0. So with these keyframes still selected, I'm going to right click on them, go to Keyframe Assistant, and Time Reverse Keyframes. That just swaps the keyframes there. And now we can see we have our text at 90%. And it animates back down to 0%. Now another thing that I like to do is instead of just having my text animate in and animate out, I like to have it animate over the entire course of the composition. So instead of just having it go from 0 to 90 and then 90 to 0, we have this huge gap here where nothing's happening. I'm going to change this keyframe right here, make sure that I only have this one selected. And I'm going to change this from 90% to 100%. And now what that does is we can see that it slowly goes from 0 to 90, and then 90 slowly to 100%, and then 100% back down to 0. Now let me just make sure that these keyframes are doing what I want them to do. Let me just highlight both these keyframes and go into the graph. I'm actually looking at the value graph right now instead of the speed graph. And we can see that most of our animation is happening around from here to here. That's where most of the movement is happening. And then over here, we just have really slow movement. Let's jump back over to the speed graph. Let's see what's going on here. I'm going to decrease this handle here. So this keyframe right here isn't having as much of an influence on the entire graph. So let's see. Just shrink those. And now let's see, we're slowly increasing. We are slowly increasing. That looks a lot better to me. Let's go ahead and render this out and see what it looks like. All right, so far it's looking pretty good. We have our text animating in and then slowly increasing in size and then shrinking back out to nothingness. Another thing that I like to do is let me highlight everything that isn't the text right here. And I'm going to adjust the beginning of these. Let's see, 1, 2. I think that looks pretty good. Let's see. This way we actually have, this is just transparent right here. So whatever footage we put this on top of, we will see the text start to come in first, and then everything else will come in. And I just like that look. I think it adds a little bit more depth to it. So there it is. We can see the text appears slightly first, and then everything else comes in. All right, now we still need one more thing to tie this all together, and that is the firelight. So I'm going to come over here to New Layer, and I'm going to create a new light. And we can see that I already have the color as like an orange fiery color. I'm going to call this Firelight. We'll keep it as a spotlight and hit OK. And then we can see this warning where camera lights do not affect 2D layers. That's fine. We will account for that in a second. I'm just going to hit OK. So right now nothing is happening because, as that was explaining to us, it only affects 3D layers. So now you can make the text a 3D layer to make it affected by the firelight that we're adding as well. A pro of this is that the flickering light from the fire will affect this layer, but a con is that since the same light that's lighting the text is also lighting the background, the text can get a little bit lost in the background sometimes. For the example, I kept the text a 2D layer, so it wasn't being affected by the flickering light, but I changed the color of the text so it stood out more. For this, I'm going to go ahead and make the text a 3D layer so we can see what that looks like. I'm going to take this light and I'm going to drag it down, and drag it over, and then change the point of interest so it's a little bit more over here. And this is just keeping everything consistent. So all of our light is coming from the bottom left corner of the screen. So let me just change this. Let me move it back a little bit. And it's looking pretty good. I like that because it has some fall off over here. It's a little bit more bright over here than over here. But one issue is the fire is flickering all over the place, but the light is just staying constant. So what we're going to do to fix that is we're going to add another expression. So I'm going to click this arrow here. I'm going to toggle down to the light options. And for the intensity, I'm going to alt-click the stopwatch. And I'm going to type in the expression wiggle parentheses 6, 30 and parentheses enter. And what that does is it randomizes the value of this right here within 30% 6 times a second. And what that does is it gives it a flickering effect. So here, let me go ahead and I'm going to turn off the fire so you can better see it. And let's see what this looks like. Let me turn off the sparks too. And we can see that our light is now flickering. Looking good. Let me turn these back on. After all this, what we really have is our finished project, but I'm just going to do one more thing, which is pre-compose everything one more time. So I'm going to right click, pre-compose. We'll call this title tutorial comp. Going to hit OK. And in the comp that we're in right now, I'm just going to the composition settings, and I'm going to change the duration from 5 seconds to 6 seconds. So now this is a 6-second composition rather than a 5-second one. I'm going to come out and just move this. So this is in the middle of our composition. This way we just have some black at the beginning and end of the title animation. Personally, I gotta say that I do prefer the text to stand out a little bit more. So I'm just going to jump back in here just so we can see how to do that. So I have our text comp right here. I'm going to uncheck the 3D box right here. So now it's just white text. So I'm going to come in here and find our text. Going to go to the character panel here. And now I can change the color to whatever I want. That will stand out a little bit more against the background. So I'll change it to kind of a lighter orange, like a yellowish orange right there, and hit OK, and we can see what this looks like. There we go. Even though that isn't being affected by the flickering light, I do have to say that I prefer the text to stand out against the background a little bit more. And if you really wanted it to still be affected by the light, you could just come in and create a new light in this composition right here, which only houses our text, and add your own flickering light to this composition. And there we have it. I hope it helps to see how I created this title to hopefully spark some ideas of your own. Of course, all the specific effects and settings that I use can be changed to match the specific look that you're going for with your own title. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you have any requests for what you want to see next, feel free to let me know as well. So I hope you keep at it and keep learning, and I will see you in the next video.